Well, it's 9 o'clock. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Region 6W Workforce Summit. It's great to see such a great crowd turn out for this event. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. My name is Kevin Kettleson, and I'm a Community Development Specialist with the Upper Minnesota Valley Regional Development Commission in Appleton. For those of you that are unfamiliar with our organization, we're a 5-county development agency serving local units of government, including cities, counties, townships, and school boards in Big Stone, Chippewa, Lackaparle, Swift, and Yellow Medicine counties, as well as the Upper Sioux community. Some of the services we provide are economic development and community development, comprehensive planning and zoning, transportation planning, recreational planning, regional marketing and tourism, grant writing and administration, and we also have a revolving loan fund. As part of our work each year, we survey our local units of government, asking them what keeps them up at night, what kind of issues are they seeing, and this helps guide our work plan and the work that we do, and we hope to take that information and help our member communities solve their issues. Each year since we've been doing this, going back to 2019, workforce-related issues has been at the top of that list. As you recall, several years ago, job openings, vacancies, employers would probably post the want ad in the paper, have several people apply for their job. They'd conduct interviews, select the most qualified person, offer them a competitive wage and salary. If everything worked out, they'd be hired and probably stick on for several years, maybe even their entire career. You know that's not the case today, right? Today, I think Luke and Kelly will touch on this, but I think there's three job openings for every one person looking. People are being much more selective on what they're doing, where they're living. They're looking for quality housing. They're asking about childcare. They're looking at leisure activities, recreational opportunities. If they have children, they're looking at the quality of the school system. And then they're also wondering, what kind of broadband do you have here? My wife works at home and she needs a strong, fast signal. Do you have that to offer? So there's a lot of things that people are looking for these days. And as employer and communities, we all need to work together to provide prospective workers with a comprehensive, attractive recruitment package nowadays. So in addition to the activities I mentioned earlier, one of our roles in the region is that of a convener. The RDC may not always be the expert on certain topics, but our extended network of regional partners allows us to gather those who can work together toward a common goal, similar to what we're doing here today. We tried to tailor this event for both employers and community leaders and partners. So just to give everyone an idea of who's here, raise your hand if you're here representing a business. If you're a business owner, a manager, HR, okay, pretty good crew. How about school and education? Good. Elected officials, do we have any elected officials? Okay, yeah, a few. And community development folks? All right, so you can see there's a good variety of folks here. It's our hope that you come away from this event with a better understanding of the current workforce issues, as well as a few ideas you can take back to your community to help address your specific needs, or discover new ways to work together on issues with someone else in the room that you just met today. So now, after sharing what we're here for and our goal of the event, I just have a few housekeeping items. Restroom locations are out the back door and to the left as you exit the back. Lunch will be served at this room at noon. There's breakfast over there, so please help yourself through the morning time. And in the afternoon, we'll have a break and we'll have some cookies and pop and water and everything in the back, as well as, I think the cookies will be over there. We have breakout sessions, as you probably see on your agenda. They will be held here and in the Hazel Creek room, which is out the door and to your right. There's 2 breakout sessions this morning and just one in the afternoon. You'll notice that the event is being video recorded. We'll send out links to those recordings after the event, so if you missed a session that you want to see, those will be available for viewing after the event. Then we'll also plan to send out the presenter slides with that as well. And finally, at the end of the day, there'll be a social networking event at Blue Nose Gopher Public House in beautiful downtown Granite Falls. immediately after this until maybe 6:30. So we'd hope that hope to see you all there. And before we get going, I'd just like to thank the members of our planning committee that helped put this event on today. Appreciate all the work that they put into this and the commitment to get us to where we are today. Scott Marquardt of Southwest Initiative Foundation, Carrie Bendix and Kelly Rickert from the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, Ariane Ferris from Southwest West Central Services Cooperative, Jack Gottfried from Montevideo EDA, Lisa Graffentine, Ortonville EDA and Big Stone Area Growth, Kyle Haugen, Granite Falls EDA, Leanna Larson, Swift County RDA, my coworker, Melissa Strike from the RDC, Hillary Devamic from Prairie's Edge, and Hillary Tweed from Benson EDA. And finally, a big thank you to our presenters and panelists for taking time out of their day to share their expertise and experiences with all of you today. A lot of them are just like you guys. They live and work in this region, and I appreciate them being willing to share their insight with you, all of you today. So if you get a chance to thank them throughout the day, please do so. With all that being said, I think it's time to get started. Our first speakers today are Luke Greiner, who's a labor market analyst with DEED, and Kelly Asche, senior researcher with the Center for Rural Policy and Development. Luke will be leading things off with an overview of workforce data and trends to help us understand the current labor market conditions, and Kelly will discuss the shift away from job recruitment to people recruitment. So with that, thank you again for coming, appreciate it, and I'll turn things over to Luke.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm on a time schedule, so I have my phone here to help me keep time. But I'm Luke Greiner. I'm a labor market analyst with the Department of Employment and Economic Development. I see quite a few familiar faces, but if you're not familiar with us, we're the office that produces all the economic data and statistics for the state on behalf of the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the Fed. So the unemployment rate, the monthly press release, the jobs report, wage data, all that is produced in my office. And one of the unique things about the team that I am on is that we aren't housed in St. Paul. So I live in the same region I work, which is a requirement for my job, and I cover central and southwest Minnesota. So I'm actually from west central Minnesota. All my family farms just north of here, and I live in rural Stearns County. And if you're curious about this type of information that I'm going to be talking about, I publish a regional profile for every single county and every single region of the state. And you can find out like demographic and economic stuff about your area. It's kind of like a great place to get a general overview of what's going on. And you can find it at mn.gov/deed. If you go to that blue ribbon up there, go to data, it's under regional labor markets. And you can see this is Southwest Minnesota. It's a lot of fun stuff. If you want to look like a genius at Thanksgiving, you just download one of these reports, memorize the entire thing, and I swear it'll be a huge hit. So I please encourage you to do that. So I'm going to walk you kind of through a level setting presentation, or at least to give you an idea of where we are. I'm going to try not to drum this and just beat this horse to absolute death, because I feel like everybody that comes out here and presents does the same thing. I have for years. But first I'm going to start out looking at Minnesota statewide, just to give you some context of where we are. So our unemployment rate, basically being held steady for the past few months. It has increased over the summer. That's something that you kind of would expect as the Fed is tightening monetary policy to drive down inflation rates. So our official unemployment rate statewide is about 3.1%. That's really low. Everybody knows that. Our labor force size has been increasing slightly, which is good. But I think the main takeaways here is our labor force statewide, not just here, the entire state, we're still short 14,000 workers compared to where we were just prior to the pandemic in February 2020, right? Right in the beginning of 2020, we were down like 150,000 workers, but we've been regaining folks back as basically folks enter our labor market, all right? So that's where we are. Our entire state has fewer workers now than it did 3 years ago, but our economy doesn't necessarily demand less from our goods producing and service providing companies, right? So we're trying to do more with less. And oddly, it hasn't really pushed wages up high enough to keep up with inflation. So our private sector average hourly wages are up 3.3% over the year compared to 3.7% inflation. And since August 2020, like the last 3 years, they're up 13.6% compared to over 18% for inflation. So we don't see wage pressures really keeping up with inflation yet, or at least it certainly hasn't. And that's a bit of a nuance because our labor market is super tight, so we would expect wages to at least keep up with inflation, or at least begin keeping up with inflation, but they haven't yet. So that's statewide. This is what's going on in our area here. So this is Region 6W. This blue line here, this just represents jobs, all right? And this looks entirely different than what you see in most other areas of the state, not necessarily outside of this region, but if you look statewide, the Twin Cities, other rural areas outside of southwest Minnesota, you see pretty healthy job gains since, say, 2010, the end of the Great Recession. But in this area, you can see that we kind of peaked, right around actually the Great Recession, and we've been on a continual slide downward. So the pandemic recession that happened in 2020 was really just part of a long-term trend, just accelerating job decline that you can kind of see right here. And you can see some modest job gains as we start climbing out of that recession, but we're still nowhere near where we had, in terms of jobs, what we had in 2019. So we definitely have fewer jobs now than we had in 2019, and at the pace that we're recovering, it's obviously going to take years and years to try to get back. However, I'm not actually sure if that's the benchmark since we've had kind of sliding employment the whole time. I apologize if this is kind of depressing news, but this is just what it is. If you're curious where these job declines are happening, these are all the different major industry sectors in the area, and you can see job change since pre-pandemic to the first quarter of this year. The big one there is healthcare and social assistance, off almost 400 jobs, just slightly over. A lot of that's focused in our nursing and residential care facilities, which were a bit overrepresented here. You can see construction, a bright spot, with 73 more jobs, and same with manufacturing. Those two sectors are actual goods producing sectors, have been strong across the state, but they've also been strong here. Unfortunately, they've been stronger other places. So in some areas of the state, construction growth has been enough to offset the losses, say, in education and in our healthcare sector. In this area, not so much. And then we also have pretty broad losses still in a lot of other industry sectors. So the reason that I'm showing you this is to explain that it's not just accommodation and food services, right? That's what we talked about in 2020. What we have is a really broad loss of jobs, okay, across many, many industry sectors, not just that sector, accommodation and food services, that was really crippled during the beginning of 2020. And a lot of this is really hinged on our labor force. So just like we've had employment losses, that red line up there, that's actually the labor force trend for this area. And that is a pinch point in our economy. This area struggled with this a long, long time, right? Especially if you look at our population that peaked half a century ago in this area. We're looking at significant challenges. We have fewer and fewer workers every year. And then if you look at what we project into the future, it's not necessarily roses there either. We project 6% fewer workers in a decade. And the reason I'm telling you this, again, is not to depress you, but it's to really have you understand that, don't expect things to just change. We're not going back, likely, to where we were in 2015, 2019. The shift that's happened with our labor force is pretty systematic, and that means that our strategies are going to have to be adapting because our labor force isn't going to be what it used to be, right? I think that's probably the most important thing to consider is if we continue trying to do what we used to do, we're going to be probably chasing our tails. That's not a viable solution. And that leads us to the structural challenges within our economy. So here, that orange line there, that's job vacancies in southwest Minnesota. The blue bars there are unemployed workers. And the black dot is the ratio of unemployed workers for every job openings. So at 0.3, that means if we could get to 0 people unemployed, which is an unrealistic and not a healthy benchmark, we would only be able to fill 30% of the openings that we have, right? And that means who you hire is likely not unemployed. You probably already know that. I've asked a number of employer forum groups in the past couple months, how many of them have hired somebody that's unemployed? And almost nobody responds, yeah, I have. Typically, you're hiring somebody that already has a job. And that changes things too, because the strategies that you employed to hire people that are unemployed are very, very different than strategies to lure somebody away from a different company, different area, a competitor. And this is why our job loss is systematic. We don't have enough people to recover those jobs that we lost. It's not necessarily that our economy here is dwindling due to lack of demand or anything like that. We just don't have enough people to fill the openings that we have. If we could fill all the openings we have, we could fully recover our economy just like that. But since we can't recover those jobs. It takes a person, a body, to fill a job in order for us to count it. And until then, it's just an opening. If you're curious where the openings are at or what they look like, you kind of have the usual suspects at the top. Food prep, serving related, that's like your fast food occupations. Lots of turnover there, entry level in nature, relatively low wages, always a lot of churn, so there's always a lot of openings. But then you can also see production occupations, sales, healthcare, support and healthcare practitioners. That's a huge amount of openings. And then think about that chart that I showed you where we have job loss, healthcare, right? They're posting record numbers of openings. At the same time, they're losing jobs. That's just indicative of a challenge. It's not necessarily that they're cutting back. They're trying to hire people, as are basically every single industry here. They're just not able to fill them. So that's the story of our job loss here. It's actually kind of the story of our job loss everywhere. But in this area, it's more acute. It's been happening in the same manner for years and years. So when I'm in other parts of the state, I always tell them, talk to somebody in Southwest Minnesota. They've been dealing with this for a long time. And if anybody has it figured out, at least I always brag about you guys being cooperative and stuff like that. At least you're further along this problem-solving journey than everybody else. Everybody else is just starting to grapple with it, but you've been living it for the better part of a decade. And it's not necessarily just Minnesota. It's all across the country, and certainly not isolated to this area. But I want to show you this chart, which kind of sums up the challenge. So this is statewide. And what I want to show you here is, all right, layoffs and discharges, that's in red. All right, so this is a count of workers. In the black line is quits, right? So that's a moving monthly amount of people that are quitting their job. And you can see after the pandemic recession here, which you can see the layoffs and discharges spikes, goes nuts. You can see quits increases. You expect that. People quit their jobs at higher rates when the economy is good because you feel confident and comfortable and you seek better paying jobs. Better jobs, better benefits, all that, right? So we see quits increase. And really the interesting one here is the orange line, that's job openings. And look how it crosses over the hiring rate in, what was that, 2014, right? And if you think back to 2014, which might seem like a century ago, that is when we first started in this area talking about challenges to hire, skills gap, all that stuff. And then, Kelly and I, we've been talking about it all the way up into the pandemic recession. And employers have been responding, trying to hire, increasing openings, but you can see the amount of people actually being hired, the rate itself, is relatively stagnant. So we just have openings piling on top of openings, and they're not really getting filled at any different rates than what we've had in the past, right? This is for statewide. I would put my career that it's probably more substantial here, right? Because we have a tighter labor market here, and we have for quite some time. So if you're looking around at where your next worker might be, and again, I don't want to just show up, put everybody to sleep, and depress you. So I get lots of questions about, what should we be doing? And I'm not going to tell you what to do because I'm not qualified to do that. But there's one area that I at least see that has some pretty solid potential, something that you can do in the short term that's manageable and you can make a difference in the margins. And honestly, if you're looking for like, a golden bullet, you're just going to keep looking. We're only going to be making improvements in the margins. I think that's our best case scenario. If you can make some improvements in multiple directions in the margins, that's terrific. But our next workers are likely already here. They're in our school system. They are the largest group of new labor entrants that we have. And it would be awesome to lure people from other states, other countries, other regions. But in the context of like size, they're here. It's our students. This is enrollment in our area of our school district system, right? K-12. And you can see that it's relatively constant in terms of enrollment. It's certainly not increasing the younger we go, but if we think of each one of these bars as basically an assembly line, and they get dumped out of high school and enter our labor market, enter our communities in a different capacity than obviously they are as a student, we're kind of looking at, not depressing news, like just slightly less, but that's a lot of extra workers every year that are going to be entering our labor force in our own area, right? And they're entering this labor market at a vastly different time than when I entered the labor market. Like, after the military, I got out in 2009, and that's when I entered the labor market in like a traditional sense. Just a tremendously awful time to be looking for a job. Completely different than students these days, right? I went to college not necessarily because I really loved to go to college, but I didn't have to pay for it, and I couldn't get a job, and I had really nothing better to do than to go to college, right? Things are completely different for students. And it's changing the landscape of education entirely. So we see change happening in our higher education system, right? Huge enrollment declines at a lot of universities, programs being cut, programs being changed, expanded, just flux, right? And students are they're kind of entering this labor market. They're seeing headlines, they're absorbing, and they see the opportunity that's around them. And that opportunity is being shaped by employers. So this trend line right here just shows you the share of openings, single fly in here, share of openings that employers say can be done with a high school diploma or less. And that share is actually increasing, meaning a decreasing amount of openings require any higher education at all. That's employers responding to a tight labor market. Because in the Great Recession, when I was applying for jobs, employers used higher education as a filtering mechanism, right? As they leaned down and cut their HR staff, the remaining staff that were left had to filter through an abundance of applicants, a surplus of labor. We don't have that anymore. So employers are cutting back those educational requirements as a way to free up labor, increase the size of the labor pool. And students respond, right? So this is looking at students in this area and just to the south. They're enrolling in higher education both at the 4-year and 2-year at decreasing rates, right? They're just responding. You can see all this is just responsive to our labor market, but then that kind of begs the question, what can you do about it? Is this good? Is it bad? Like, have you even thought about this? I know some of the education folks have, but what about our companies, our municipalities, our school districts? Because when I see this data, what I see is a decreasing need from employers for higher education, which means the last stop for a lot of our students before they get on to their career is in our communities at our local school district. And instead of thinking of our district as a place to prepare you for something next, another institution that can prepare you for the real world might start after high school for a lot of these kids. It already does, and it has, but it might do that at increasing rates. What is our high schools doing to ensure the success of our students? Are they partnering with our local businesses? Are they partnering with our higher education partners to make all this a little bit more relevant to students? That's the kind of questions that I ask, because this is the leaky pipe that I see, partially because I leaked out of the pipe myself, but I don't think I'm necessarily unique either, right? And when I say a leaky pipe, this is a talent pipeline of people coming out of high school, not knowing exactly what the heck they're going to do, and then they meander, flounder, take some time off, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but it's a bad thing if it's not necessarily, or if it's preventable, or if it could have been avoided, if people could graduate high school and have a better idea of what they're doing, right? And the way I see it is, you got, roughly 500 to 600 students graduating high school just in this region every single year. How many of those leave the area to search for something else that's already here that just don't even know? And what are we doing to make sure that we are highlighting what we have? Because other areas do a really great job of highlighting what they have, and they might not even have to do it as an intentional way as we do. A lot of this is done through career and tech ed, right? This is kind of the vehicle at which students explore careers and gain technical skills in high school. It used to be called like vocation or vocational training, stuff like that. It's CTE. It's this funding mechanism that the Department of Education, again, I don't work for education, never have, likely never will, but I'm doing my best to understand this. And it's how students in our schools get acquainted with the type of opportunities that we have, the type of companies in their own backyard, and to gain some sort of skill set that's value added, so that way then when they get out of high school, they can make a productive life for themselves. But in the past, since we've dismantled CTE since the 80s, a lot of CTE is really just focused on, like I call them those kids, because nobody likes labels, but those kids is probably as PC as I get. It's those kids that are disruptors, those kids that are academically challenged, those kids that might not excel in a classroom setting. So we've catered and we've designed programs to get them skills, marketable skills, because they're likely never going to go to college or anything beyond, so that way they can do something with their lives out of high school, right? And I think there's lots of value in that. I don't think that's necessarily a bad focus. However, I think we've missed the mark in limiting CTE to just those kids, because I think CTE is beneficial to all kids. And if you're in school and you see your SHOT program, your FACS program, whatever, occupied by students that you don't necessarily identify with, like they might be students that are disrupting the classroom or labeled losers or something like that. They're not smart because they don't get good grades, whatever you want to call it. Am I going to go and pursue that? Am I going to enroll in those same classes, or am I going to opt out? Am I going to instead self-select into courses that prepare me for something else, even if it's not even necessarily relevant to what I want to do, right? And I don't have any data to back this up. It's an observation, it's an anecdote. So we ask, who is CTE for? And the reason I say that is because when we look, we've done research, and when we look at who actually takes CTE, it's those kids. It's the kids that are eligible for free and reduced lunch, right? It's every marker of barriers that we have is kind of an indicator that you're more likely to be in CTE. It's those receiving special education service. We do actually have more CTE in rural Minnesota, which is why we have more homogeneous enrollment in terms of like ethnic or race. So we have more white kids, basically just a reflection that we have more CTE out here. But even if you look at math and reading scores, you're more likely to be a student of CTE if you're math or reading deficient, right? Every marker that we have for a barrier kind of funnels people into CTE. And that's somewhat problematic. It becomes an employer's problem when you look at how CTE impacts students. So this chart right here shows you retention in your region. So if you go through high school and you concentrate in CTE, which is a pretty low barrier, it's 150 hours, it's like 2 courses, right? If you concentrate in CTE, you're more likely, like here's Southwest, so the green is just all students, the blue is CTE concentrated, more likely to be employed in the same region you graduated high school in, all right? And if your CTE experience had a work-based learning component, meaning like getting you out of the classroom and into an employer's place, you're even more likely to be retained in the region that you graduated high school. Any ideas on why that might be?
Because
Yeah, they're making awesome connections with local employers, right? And, you know, I think about this, and maybe this is not quite sound thinking, but I can't help but think that students making these connections, it's an even bigger benefit to the students that don't already have those connections, right? So all of your kids, they probably have awesome connections because you're here, you have the time, you have a professional network, they're all here, right? Plus you probably have many more. You know the movers and shakers, you know people who can get you jobs, connect you to jobs. But what about all the folks in our community that never get to show up to events that Kelly and I talk to? Their parents are working multiple jobs, put food on the table, stuff like that. Their kids probably don't know the movers and shakers in their community. They probably don't know the employers, right? So connecting those kids with actual meaningful connections in their community, the folks that can be mentors and show them kind of the opportunities that we have, that's big stuff. It helps everybody. I think, you know, it probably has a disproportionate impact for the kids that need it the most anyways. So I see CTE as a really, really pivotal piece of solutions. It's something that you can control because this is basically dictated by your local school district. You don't have to deal with the crazy bureaucracy I have to at the state. It's something I've seen done on a relatively short span, so the scope of change is relatively quick. You don't have to wait a decade. This is something I've seen like unfold within a couple of years to make a difference again at the margin. This isn't going to solve your demographic problem, but it's certainly an area that we can make some improvements in. And the last thing I'm going to cover is just to give you a snapshot of what students in our area think. So this is from the Southwest Career Expo this year, students from our area. These are 10th graders I get to survey. And I ask them a battery of questions. And so this is one of the questions we ask, you know, what type of job are you most interested in? This is actually shifting. Cheryl, you and I were kind of talking about this. And this is shifting because when I first started doing this about a decade ago, about 1% of our students were interested in manufacturing or like STEM stuff. And that's our second largest industry. In a lot of our communities, it's the biggest industry, okay? So now we see that seems to be increasing in awareness, right? Because this is the perception of what we have. I also see increases in sales and marketing. I see increases in architecture and construction. And I see decreases in I'm not sure. And through this period of time that I've been doing this, we have more and more CTE, more and more career exploration opportunities for our students. But research proves that if you just send your kids to the Career Expo once a year and you say, hey, we showed them the best we have, our job is done here, you're just wrong. Because that will help for probably a brief moment in time. Think of your own attention span, right? And then it's gone. This is like a high-touch solution. You need to continually show and showcase what we have. It can't just be send them to a one-time event and they know all the great things we have in Southwest Minnesota. They need continual exposure and meaningful connections to actually make a difference. So that way they don't leave this area, leave all their family and social network and the people that can help them if they get into a jam, end up in another community that looks the exact same but they know nobody with the same type of jobs that we have here, right? I'm not saying we have to prevent our kids from leaving, but what we should certainly do is help them stay if they want to. And students tell us that they want to know what they would be doing on the job. What's the most helpful information to decide what career you want? In blue, what I would be doing on the job. I can't tell them that. I can tell them what it's like to be an analyst or an economist, but I can't tell them what it's like to be a nurse, because I'm not a nurse. That means we need to have the people actually doing these jobs connecting with our students, not HR. HR is really only qualified to go and talk about what it's like to be in HR, right? They don't want to do necessarily what I do. Using interactive online tools, that's probably the best thing I can do. Build fancy dashboards to help them explore careers, but only 6.5% of students say, yeah, that's how I want to get this information. They want to get it from hearing from people who do actual different jobs. Our education system can't do that on their own, right? It requires cooperation and collaboration with our business partners. I also asked, what they plan to do after high school. The majority there, they say they plan to get a bachelor's degree. And I know that that is not what is typical in terms of what they actually do end up doing. A far smaller share ever end up going to a university, and a much larger share end up going to a 2-year school. And let's see, get a job in gray, 11%. Also a much larger share don't enroll in anything and just end up entering the labor force. Which means that what we're preparing our students for, what they think they're being prepared for, isn't necessarily what they're actually going to be doing either. This is changing for students between 10th grade and their senior year. I think it's really important that they're actually getting prepared for what they're likely able to do. And this one is maybe most important. Where do you want to live? And you can see that almost half want to stay in the same area, right? Near my current hometown, in the same area of the state, or 40%, I guess I should say, but not the same hometown. And then another over 25% still want to stay in a rural area, right? So by and large, our students probably want to stick around anyways. So are we helping them achieve that? Because if you think, well, we just can't keep our kids, they don't want to live here, a lot of them do. And if they feel like their school experience in our public system is to prepare them for college, what about those students that never plan to go to college? How engaged are they in our high school? Because we need them to be as engaged as possible. There's a tremendous value in our high school, but they need to understand that connection. We need to spoon feed our kids and show them the value that our high school has. We do it with partnerships with our higher education systems, like with our particularly 2-year schools, and we do it with partnerships with our businesses, right? Because those students that feel like all I'm doing is being prepared to go to do something I can't afford to do, don't want to do, how engaged are they in our high school? And it's pivotal that they are, because the skills gap that we've researched for over a decade now, when employers tell us what skills are deficient, it's the skills that you learn in high school, the soft skills. Sharing your color crayons, right? Showing up, playing in the sandbox, getting along with others, mitigating conflict resolution, all that. That's not necessarily stuff you really master in college. It's stuff you really learn at a pretty young age, and we can do it right here. So, I think that's one of the most important aspects, that we can actually make a meaningful difference in the margins. And I'll stop with, no, I'm not going to tell a quick story. It's Kelly's turn. So if you're curious about this type of information, we have resources. We try to get this information in front of students, but it's really difficult because I'm a nerd and a lot of people just don't want to listen to my stuff. It takes people like you, a diverse array of folks, helping our students understand what we actually have. This stuff is really fun. It's fun for guys, also fun for girls. See, that's a girl. My name's Luke. I'm going to hand it over to Kelly. Oh, I left you hanging. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You should hold on to it.
Oh, yeah. I hit up my question time,
No,
but not yours.
Yeah, no big deal. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to blow through a bunch of stuff at the beginning here because it's really unnecessary, the obligatory who we are, but just real quickly. I'm the senior researcher for the Center for Rural Policy and Development. If you're not familiar with us, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, partially funded and created by the state legislature in the late 90s. All we do is research issues in rural Minnesota. That is our shtick. Like any rural organization, we try to do as much as we can with the very little we have. So there's just 3 of us. We're a virtual office. I live in New London, Minnesota, in Candido County, just north of here. If you are curious, we do research on a broad array of issues, so this kind of gives you an idea. We did one on looking at the education formula, what it does for rural school districts and what it doesn't do, identifying bottlenecks and roadblocks in the rural mental health career pipeline. And then if anybody is interested, I know probably a lot of you are hearing about childcare being an issue. We did do a report that it was an environmental scan of all the different programs and initiatives that are taking place in rural Minnesota to try and increase capacity for childcare. It's a real quick kind of report if you're interested in doing that. Upcoming, I am going to talk about the journey to meaningful employment for Southwest High School graduates. I'll be talking a little bit about that today. That report comes out on Tuesday, fingers crossed. And then my boss is doing suicide and 988 hotline usage in rural Minnesota and the mental health stuff. And we're all on the internet things. All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit, real briefly, overview of job vacancies also, but Luke already did that. My main thing and my main message today is trying to get people to understand the shift away from recruiting jobs to recruiting people. This is a monumental shift. There's nothing in modern history that we can go back to take records and look at what's best practices, because we don't know. We've never actually lived through a time as fundamentally different than we do today. So I'm going to skip through this stuff and go right to job vacancies. As Luke was saying, 0.4 job seekers per vacancy in 2021. I did put the job vacancy rates for each planning region. Southwest is the kind of lighter blue, and you can see by 2021 job vacancy rate was 8.6%. That means if you were to take the number of job vacancies in this region divided by the total filled jobs, it makes up 8.6% of that, which is obviously historical, and I would argue pretty much insane in terms of how high that is. We consider 3 to 4% job vacancy rate to be kind of healthy. That means you have opportunities for the people in your region, while at the same time employers have an applicant pool to choose from. That 3, 4, 5% is kind of that sweet spot. You guys are getting close to 10%, which is nowhere near healthy. And it's worth mentioning when we look at the job vacancy data, and Luke kind of showed that chart of all the number of vacancies in the Southwest region. It's very clear because there's always this narrative, well, all the job vacancies are low paying, low skill, food jobs, food prep jobs. That is not true. And you all know this, but our legislators don't, and people in leadership positions don't understand that yet. And it just has to be constantly hammered home. This is across all industries, all occupations, all wages, all academic backgrounds required. We need it all. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. So this is the fundamental shift taking place, and you guys all know this, from business recruitment to people recruitment. This is a statewide issue. You guys are not alone, which means we're all competing for people against each other. I don't need to tell you guys this, but North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa and Wisconsin are all in the same place. We're all competing for the same people. So what's being talked about, and some of the things I'm going to go over here real quick, is we're talking about investing in non-traditional economic development. This is an uncomfortable point in our history. Economic developers are uncomfortable because we're talking about the things that we used to consider to be kind of fluffy, right? Stuff that we didn't worry about that much. Things like resident recruitment, retention initiatives, high school engagement, childcare, housing. How are we engaging the people that maybe retired early? How can we get them back into the labor force? These are things that we're not used to talking about. So the policy implications is what we try to hammer home, because our goal at Center for Rural Policy and Development is to educate legislators about kind of what's going on. And we have an entire framework that was developed since the 1950s, 1960s that was based on business recruitment. We have lived through decades and decades of job shortages. And the people in our leadership positions, county commissioners, city council members, legislators, senators, governors, presidents, congresspeople have lived decades through that mindset that there weren't enough jobs for the amount of people we have. And that is not the case anymore. And it happened quickly. We knew it was coming. We've been talking about the baby boomer generation retiring out of the labor force since the early 2000s. But it's hard to talk about that when it's not here. Now it's here. And as Luke was talking about, this was happening before the pandemic. We were facing this for quite a while. The pandemic kind of put it on overdrive, and we had a lot of people leave the labor force that we weren't expecting. A lot of those, and Luke didn't touch too much on that, were 55 and older in particular in this region, was pretty heavy in terms of labor force losses there. So we're talking about collaboration now. And like I said, housing programs, locally as CTE pathways, visitor strategies, current resident engagement, focus on quality of life issues. And I'm going to go through some of the stuff right now. So let's talk about resident recruitment, retention, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about CTE and play off of what Luke is talking about, and we'll pause for questions there. Resident recruitment and retention. So I call this the rural envy. How many of you are familiar with Greater MSP? A few of you? So Greater MSP is like the organization in the Twin Cities that does resident recruitment and engagement for the 7-county metro area. Essentially, they develop videos, they tell stories about what it's like to live in the Twin Cities, what it's like to raise a family, what the school districts are like, what's the nightlife like, where is there to eat, what kind of jobs are available, really kind of playing up this story of what it's like to live in the Twin Cities. And I think a lot of rural regions would love to have something similar to this. This is kind of what we're going for. Now, there are a few things. This is my super outdated map now because there's a lot more stuff going and some of the stuff isn't going anymore. And I give credit to the University of Minnesota Extension because they've been kind of on the front lines of doing research around this issue and trying to help regions develop these kind of promotional tools and engagement ideas. But here are some of them. And Get Rural, that's the one here in Region 6W with the Upper Minnesota Valley RDC doing a great job. And this isn't as if rural areas are just reaching. We're just trying to get people, whoever. This is actually based on a foundational research. Many of you maybe have heard Ben Winchester speak at the University of Minnesota Extension, but it's based on the idea that yes, rural areas tend to lose our young people, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we maybe can not have that happen, as Luke was talking about. But rural regions tend to see growth in 30 to 49-year-olds. That growth or that in-migration of 30 to 49-year-olds usually doesn't make up the out-migration of our young people, but it is a trend that happens. And it's been happening since the 1970s, and we haven't even been trying. So the theory goes, well, what if we tried? What if we tried to recruit and actively sought out 30 to 49-year-olds from metro areas to come and live in our rural areas? And that's what we're talking about. And so in University of Minnesota Extension, they did these focus groups. And they actually did it in this region in 6W back in, I think it was 2015, 16, somewhere in there, where they brought people in that had moved to the region in the last 5 years and asked them why. What are your reasons for moving here? Top 3 reasons: affordable housing, small class sizes, and then this overall theme of quality of life. So there are a lot of things like slower pace of life. I want to have my children to be able to just bike around the block and not have to worry that much and not worry about traffic and things like that. Those were kind of quality of life issues. Jobs, unless you're an immigrant and refugee population, that was number 1. Otherwise, if you weren't a part of those populations, jobs wasn't even in the top 5, which really kind of flew in the face of traditional economic development because for a long time, like I said, since the 1970s for sure, it was if we bring jobs, if we build it, they will come. If we have jobs, more people will come here. Now we have the jobs, and we're still struggling to get people here. This is one I always like too because, okay, if we're going to start recruiting people, who does this? At what level of government should we do this? Do we do this as a city? Do we do this as a county? And I like this because it kind of tells the story of how people actually live, right? So if you were to talk to anybody and you say, put a dot where you live, you know, let's say they put it in where I grew up in Hancock, Minnesota. You put the dot and then you put an X where you work, and let's say I worked in Morris, 8 miles away, and then you say draw a circle around where you shop, and that circle probably extended out to Alexandria, Benson, Hoffman, Fergus Falls, and around that area, right? So that's kind of where I do my shopping. And then you say draw a circle around where you play. Well, it's like, well, I like to play. I like to go to Glacier Lake State Park. I like Big Stone. I like to go up north. And all of a sudden that circle gets pretty big, right? We're cruising all over the place. And so this is a regional thing. People live regionally, but they may sleep and have a house locally, right? And so the way we live our lives is very different, and this really points out that why we need to work together as regions or as communities and counties and not as a singular effort in one town. Because I think people tend to focus too much on how can we be that one thing for everyone? How can Hancock, Minnesota be the place that people have a house, do their shopping, have their childcare, have their school? Maybe that's not realistic because people are perfectly comfortable having Morris be the place they do some of their shopping and maybe some of their employment, but dang it, they love living in Hancock because it's affordable housing, it's super safe, and it's quiet and has a school there. That's enough. That's all it needs to be. I always use this, and I'm not using this just today because I'm in Region 6W. This is my go-to kind of graphic here for Upper Minnesota Valley and how they do some of their promotional engagement. I'm sorry, this is probably a little outdated now. I got this back in 2018. But I think it really points out like what we're trying to do in engagement and promotion is really trying to grapple and like wrangle up a lot of different things about our community. And this is where it gets complicated, right? How do we have a place where people can find housing, employment opportunities, things to do, family essentials? How do we get that out there to people? And just think about all the people that we have to get involved to get this information. We have to get our employers involved. We have to get our school district involved. We have to get our healthcare involved, right? How do we do this? And not only that, but it also points to this complexity of who does what. So the recruitment challenges and things that we need to think about as a region, I know you guys are honestly way ahead of schedule on this, and there's a lot of regions that aren't. Building a network from scratch. So essentially, we've been operating in silos for a long time, particularly as communities. And so how do we start getting school districts, employers, counties, lodging, housing, how do we all start working together to make this network work? Who's responsible? Is this a tourism thing? Is this an EDA thing? Is this a county commissioner thing? I'll bring up one example that I forgot to include a slide, but that's with the Rural Rebound Coordinator out of Otter Tail County. Is anybody familiar with what they're doing there in Otter Tail County? Some of you? So the county commissioners of Otter Tail County actually created a position, fully funded, called the Rural Rebound Coordinator. And all this person does is run get your inner otter. Does anybody, what's the name of their, what is it, Melissa? Find Your Inner Otter, which is essentially a program dedicated to promoting the area as a great place to live and work. And Eric, his name is Eric, right, Melissa? Yes. Yeah, Osberg. He goes around interviewing people like, hey, what's it like to live in Fergus Falls? What's it like ice fishing? Here's some winter activities to do here. Really just giving the story and doing a really, really good job at that. So I highly suggest you guys look that up. You can Google it. There's some Star Tribune articles being talked about it. Some other challenges, we have negative narrative and perceptions. Not only do we have negative narratives from people that might be in a metro area looking at rural area, but I think we could all argue that we have some negative narratives and perceptions within our own communities that need to be overcome. And I know I experienced that a lot in New London, and I think New London's like the coolest town in the world. And then people complain about it, like the letter to the editors. Oh my God. This is ridiculous. Like, are you that bored? And then the diversity of skill set required for these initiatives. Marketing is not easy. Creating websites, doing photographs, conducting interviews, writing, like it's a broad skill set that needs to be kind of wrangled together. And the other recruitment challenges that I think right now, there is no systematic funding mechanism right now. Not to say anything about DEED, but DEED isn't funding anything like this, right? The state of Minnesota isn't funding anything like this. Sometimes tourism will get involved, but this really has to be done locally. And I think that's one thing we really need to take away is right now I do not see, particularly the federal government, I haven't seen anyone at the federal government level to be on board or to really truly understand the situation we're in. President Biden, I think, was here last week, and my boss, Julie, got invited to attend his speech in Northfield, and one of his big talking points is we're going to bring great jobs to rural Minnesota. And my boss, Julie, just did the visible, oh my God, we can't be this clueless, can we? But we are right now. Our leadership really is. They just don't understand it. And we've had decades and decades of political speeches do really well by talking about jobs. And so the infrastructure and the structure around this is really based on that. So we need to figure this out locally, because I don't know if we're going to find it systematically at a higher level at this point. And then I'm going to talk a little bit again, and Luke and I, we didn't plan this, but we both kind of got into CTE at the same time, and we're both really excited about some of the stuff we're seeing out of this, and so we're really going to hammer it home with you guys. Just really wanted to play what Luke was talking about. If you look at academic literature, changing the perceptions that students have of their local opportunity is a full court press by everyone. It can't just be a regional job fair. As we always say, and Luke will attest to this, they were excited for those 24 hours during that regional job fair and then afterwards And then they might have come home and the parent was like, nah, you're gonna go. You can't work a crummy job like that, or it sucks here. Or they talk to their friends and be like, what, you're gonna stick around, you loser, right? Like, there's all of these perceptions and pressure and narratives around what our kids should be doing that are based on an old framework of success. So 2 types of influences. We have relationships and observations. We actually have college admissions. Is anybody here in college admissions? No? Okay. Okay. Don't take this the wrong way, but academic literature is very clear that college admissions has done really well selling the idea to our students that to be successful and earn a lot of money, you have to leave your town. You have to leave your region. It's been very, very successful, particularly among 4-year colleges. Immediate family, how are we talking to our sons and daughters and cousins and nephews? And also formal advisors, obviously. And then we have the observations in the communities. What are the career opportunities, which CTE and career exploration is doing such a good job at? And again, we need to expand that. And then the community opportunities. How are we as communities engaging our young people? Do we invite them to be a part of the discussions about what we want our communities to look like? Do we make them feel valued? Are we talking to them about wanting them to stay, or are we telling them, oh, good job, you're leaving the town, good for you, I hope you do well in college, even though we have like a 30 or 40% dropout rate? So retention and engaging our youth is going to take a whole lot of things. Regional job fairs, apprenticeships, internships, career and technical instruction. It's going to take all of this to really change perceptions. There's lots of cool stuff happening across rural Minnesota that I think are, I don't want to say being ignored, but definitely underfunded and under-resourced. The CEO program, does anybody have that in this region? 6W CEO established? Yeah. I'll let those guys talk about it if you meet up with them. ProStart, is anybody familiar with ProStart? So that's a culinary arts program that got started in the Brainerd region school districts, where students can get and go through a culinary arts program in high school and learn how to not only be like a chef or a cook or anything like that, but also be able to do marketing or a manager. Lift, obviously, I think there's some workshops on Lift later today, and then the Bemidji Career Academy. So there are some things happening. I have to bring this up. Everybody's familiar with Build Dakota, right? Okay, I don't want to put the dagger in the back here, but there's no reason why, I'll just say there's no reason why Minnesota shouldn't have something like this. It's crazy to me that we don't. So let me talk about, we're going to be releasing a report on Tuesday. I got, it sounds scary, but I got academic records, college records, and employment records for every person that's graduated from high school in EDR 6W, EDR 8, and EDR 6E, so part of Southwest and Central Planning regions, going back to 2008 to 2019. So 38,154 individuals, and we've been tracking where they have been after they graduated high school. How many are these EDRs keeping in their regions? How many of them have meaningful workforce participation? That'll be coming out on Tuesday. I'll show a slide here, but the journey to meaningful workforce participation, there was really kind of these 3 main things, or these main kind of variables that we saw in the data. 1, the planning they're doing in high school. What are they planning on doing afterwards? And as Luke was alluding to, there is a big disconnect between what a student thinks they're going to do and what they actually end up doing. We have a lot of kids preparing as if they're going to go to college that don't actually end up going to college and kind of end up being a little bit of a leaky pipe issue. But testing, CTE, and local engagement, those were big variables in terms of student had meaningful workforce participation in this region. Path after high school, did they graduate from college? The location of the college and the type of degree credential they were earning were big variables. And then these workforce participation states. So let's just talk about this a little bit, and then I'm gonna end here. So states of workforce participation. So essentially we looked at every year after high school, these students, we categorized them. Did they have meaningful workforce participation in Southwest? Meaningful meaning, did they work 1,000 or more hours in a calendar year for an employer in Southwest? Not a perfect definition, but it's the best we can do at the moment. Did they have meaningful workforce participation in Minnesota, but not Southwest? They didn't have meaningful workforce participation, so they might have been working part-time and they weren't attending post-secondary. So they were just kind of just in the labor force, but not doing a ton. And then the no Minnesota employment record. So essentially they weren't going to college, and I can't find them in the Minnesota employment record system, so they're somewhere. I don't know where they're at. And there's multiple states of being that they could be in. We'll talk about that in just a second. But here's a chart that shows the proportion of individuals looking at 1 year after high school, 2 years after graduating high school, 4 years after graduating high school. And you can see that big kind of one in the middle, that's all the folks, the proportion of these individuals, these 38,154 that are attending post-secondary. You can see it was a huge chunk, and then as they go through college, all the other chunks starts expanding. A couple of things that's worth noting here is that having meaningful, I'm sorry, it says employment, but it should say meaningful workforce participation in Southwest. Usually about a little over 20 to 25%, particularly after 3 to 4 years after graduating high school. And you can see it does pretty well, but the meaningful workforce participation in Minnesota, not Southwest, is pretty skinny until you could see when college attendance starts to decrease. Then you're starting to see that grow up. This not meaningful, which we'll just kind of consider part-time, wasn't attached to anything. It's usually just 15% of the population of Southwest high school graduates just were part-time. And it just kind of stayed that way throughout the entire way. And then this no Minnesota employment record. This is the one I think a lot of people are kind of curious about. As you can see, it was pretty small and then gathers steam and ends up actually being the largest proportion of our Southwest high school graduate student population. Doesn't have a Minnesota employment record. About 30-some% when we get to 10 years after graduating high school. So what were the main things for meaningful workforce participation in Southwest? So this after high school path, the path they took, a larger proportion of students that graduate from a college in Southwest had meaningful workforce participation in Southwest. It was huge. Actually, for 2-year colleges in Southwest, 50% of these students that graduate from a Southwest Minnesota high school that went to a 2-year college in Southwest had meaningful workforce participation in Southwest 5, 6, 7, 8 to 10 years after graduating high school. It was really good to see. Graduating from a 2-year college anywhere had a higher proportion working in this region, and then either attained an associate degree or less credentialed. They were credentialed, but it was associate or less. Higher proportions in the region. High school planning. If they were engaged in CTE, it was very clear that they were more likely to have workforce participation in Southwest. Also, they're more likely to go to a college in Southwest and get a 2-year degree. It makes sense, right? Because CTE is kind of based around that idea of having careers right after high school or just a little bit of credentialing. They were not as engaged in planning for college. So as Luke was saying, MCA scores, so I forget what that even stands for, but the main testing that they do in high schools, the lower the score, the more likely they were to be in this region. If they took their ACT, if they didn't take their ACT, they were more likely to be here. You can start to see this disconnect between who we kind of have stay in our region and who we are telling to kind of, no, you need to get away. And again, it's a part of this old system, this old framework of telling our kids that they need to leave in order to find success. But as Luke showed in that chart, we have all occupations, all industries of various different credentialing that are needed, hundreds and hundreds. So why are they leaving? Why are they tending to go? And this is something we need as a region to ask ourselves. So that's what I meant by when I show this as a mismatch. What are we telling our students? They have beliefs about themselves. They have beliefs about their region, but they're being formed and shaped by people on the outside of themselves. They're not coming up with this stuff on their own. And so we need to start working much more collectively to try and understand what it is that makes some of our students leave this region. So if you're interested, sorry that's a little bit of a nuts and bolts of it. I actually just submitted the draft 2 of the report yesterday to my boss, so Tuesday it's got to be done. So report release and webinar next Tuesday, 2 to 3 p.m. There's a virtual option. You can just shoot me an email or anybody at Center for Rural Policy, and we'll get you a link to attend it virtually. And we'll be also in person at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College Student Services Building in Worthington as well. And that's where we're going to be. And we'll have it recorded and release it as well. We're pretty excited to get this out. I think it's been a long time coming. I think it's been a year and a half I've been working on this thing. So. And if you are interested, there's plenty more on our website talking about housing and childcare. And if I could just leave you with a couple things. One, with the housing, sometimes we talk a lot about workforce housing. How do we build more workforce housing or affordable housing? And there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes the most direct solution isn't always the best solution. Or let's broaden it up. That can be one solution. But another solution is if we look at housing churn in our rural areas, We have a lot of elderly that are living in single-family homes that are affordable, that really should be made available to incoming workforce people. But these elderly have no place to go. And so I think there's a lot of questions that we need to ask ourselves as a region, is if we build, some more patio style or age-appropriate housing for the folks that are in these single-family homes, there's a market to be had there. I know in New London we did this. We built a kind of single-level patio home. And I think it was 15 or 18 units were developed, and before they were even built, they were sold. And we had a waiting list of 32. And we asked the developer to come back and build some more, and he said, I would love to, but I'm booked for 4 years. And so we don't quite have enough developers right now in that market building enough for it, but I think it's huge. And I think it's something that you all should be considered, particularly if you're a municipal government and you have hopefully some vacant land sitting around. Give it to them for $1 and have them go to town on it. Childcare is another one. Again, I just wanted to say online, we do have a report talking about all the different initiatives about childcare. There's a lot of really, really interesting things going on. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be happy to give you that report. Yeah, with that. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll pause for questions, Luke and I. Any questions? All right, Kevin.
All right, thanks, Luke and Kelly. That's great information. Looking forward to your report coming out next
Yeah,
Tuesday.
me too.
At this point of the session, we'll take a quick break. So you can help yourself to some more breakfast items there, use the restrooms, socialize. Next session starts at 10:25. We have the Employer Youth Connections session in this room, and the Employer Roundtable discussions are in the Hazel Creek room out the door to your right. So, all right, thank you.